Welcome back, everyone, to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You're listening to us on United Public Radio. The intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. And today I have one of my favorite recurring guests, Dr. John Brandenburg. He's a plasma physicist. He did his graduate work in California at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in controlled plasmas for fusion power and has worked in defense, energy, and space research. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles. However, the focus of Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity and electromagnetism. John, welcome back.
Oh, always an honor and a pleasure to be on your show, Sean.
All right, so you've been kind of given clearance to do something, and it wasn't like, hey, if you want to do this, feel free. It was like, go, get it out, fast.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so what was the nature of that request, and what did they have to get out fast?
Back in the late 90s, about 1998, well, what happened first? In 1989, the pair of Japanese scientists published an article on a gyroscope, which they spun with Tesla three-phase rotating power. Very standard aviation type gyroscope. And they discovered that if the spin vector, according to the right-hand rule, was down, or meaning clockwise rotation, it lost weight. The faster you spun it, the faster it, the more weight it lost. It was losing, several milligrams, which is easy to detect with just a mechanical. They just used a mechanical scale. So, and then when they pointed it up the opposite direction, it didn't lose any weight. And that's normally kind of an effect you see in quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very odd, a very odd thing to report. And then I found out a Russian named Kozyrev had reported the same effect back in 1968. Now, this was the Japanese experiments were reported in a very prominent U.S. science journal called PhysRev Letters, and they were immediately kind of debunked by another article that was published where they used a gyroscope, and they said we spun up the gyroscope, didn't see any weight loss at all, but what it is, they used compressed air, not Tesla three-phase power.
And that was at the University of Colorado, the home of the
University of Colorado, same place the Condon reports, right next to the Air Force Academy. So
it's where UFOs go to be obfuscated, right?
Absolutely. I was savvy enough at the time to realize, okay, they're spiking this research. That means it must be important. So I managed to get some money to repeat the experiment exactly as the Russians and the Japanese had done it, and we saw the same result. This thing lost weight when we spun it clockwise, and when I spun it counterclockwise, it lost weight. No, pardon me. I had trouble telling my right from left when I was a kid. I'm still a little bit dyslexic. So clockwise, it loses weight. Counterclockwise, it didn't lose its weight.
The British would say anti-clockwise.
And well, that's the British. And MI6 must always be consulted on these matters. Just ask them about crop circles. And so what happened was we got the same result. So we went immediately to a advanced propulsion conference put on by the AIAA and reported.
By the way, when was this? Like what?
This was in 1998. We reported this.
Okay.
And we it was I'll give you a reference on a ResearchGate that has all of the references and everything like this. So what happened was also we got two aircraft gyros to do this, and one of them, the bearings were wearing out. That was annoying because it was making a lot of noise. And so I took it apart and took out the rotor. And I thought, well, it'd be interesting to just run an experiment without the rotor and see what happens. It lost more weight when I took out the rotor. So, if you've got a spinning rotor, that's got centrifugal force. That's, the faster you spin it, the more weight you lose, but it's also putting more and more stress on this thing. It could blow up like a bomb finally if you're trying to get really high speed rotation. So now suddenly you've taken out the rotor, the directional of the rotation didn't matter anymore. Very strange. I mean, I'm just reporting what we saw. And the voltage dependence of the weight loss was as the voltage to the fourth power, which is a very strong dependence. Now, we're talking about only changing gravity. The mass of the rotor did not change, but the gravity on the rotors did change. And the gravity on the device, when we took out the rotor, the whole device changed. And that was only like a 1 part in 10,000 of the weight or mass of the thing. So we're making small changes in gravity, but the experiment cost very little money to do. And so then we got better and better at doing this. And here's the thing: we came and reported this at this conference. Everybody was excited about it, and NASA, a NASA center, I'm gonna leave their name out of this, wanted to cooperate and work with this, and then very quickly it realized, oh, they're dragging their feet on this thing. They're claiming they came back to me and said, we tried your experiment, where we turn on the power, it would lose weight, we turn it off, it would regain its weight, go back to normal. You're changing the gravity field to suddenly the gravity field just relaxes back to normal. And they said, oh, the thing got heavier when we turned on the power. And I said, well, it just means you got some kind of you got some kind of arrangement that's wrong. They said, we're not interested in anything getting heavier when we turn on power. We want it to get lighter. I said, you're changing gravity. That's the, and they wouldn't listen to me. And so what I realized, oh, somebody's talked to them. And so it became apparent to me that the government did not want this talked about or pursued. So I said, fine, I'm a team player. Okay. So over the years, though, we would repeat the experiment and try and eliminate any sources of error. Like we had thin wires feeding the gyroscope, the coil, and the wires for 3-phase power have little forces between them and stuff. So we went to liquid metal contacts. They have a liquid metal that's much safer than mercury. It's called galinostan, and we use that for the metal contacts, and instead of mercury, and it worked just great. We saw a very clean signal, and we could tell that it was not interfering with the electronic scale. We were using electronic scale. Then we also found out, just to rule out any electronic effects with the scales, we hung a little coil under a balloon. And by this time, by the way, I had a theory to describe these experiments called the gem theory. I mean, I've been working on the gem theory for a long time, but I managed to derive from the theory what we call a vacuum Bernoulli equation that says you can, the Bernoulli equation enables airplane wings to work in air, but the vacuum Bernoulli equation enables things to fly even when there isn't any air. You can fly on the moon with it. In other words, you have anti-gravity. And so we discovered that if you had this, you could make this anti-gravity effect, And we found that you didn't need three-phase. Three-phase was best for making it. The theory indicated three-phase was best, but you could do it with just single phase. So we got a a PA amplifier and fed it like 400 hertz power, and we hung it beneath a balloon with some fine wires hanging on the floor, and the
Wait,
coil
you said
lighter.
you fed it 400 hertz. You mean the frequency?
Yeah, the 400 hertz, and it was at 12 volts.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
12 volts, and I can show in the reference I'll give you that has links to the videos. And we turn on the power, and this coil is hanging beneath the balloon with a nylon filament, and the whole balloon and the coil then gets lighter, or the coil gets lighter, and so the balloon rises because the coil's lighter, and it pulls the wires up off the floor till it reaches some new point of equilibrium with a certain amount of weight of the wires it's holding up with the balloon and the coil. So then you turn it off and it sinks, and it was just instant. So it wasn't a thermal effect. Thermal effects we found would take several seconds. It would make a little kind of vortex of warm air off it coming off the resistive heater. We hung a little bunch of resistors down there. And we found it. Yeah, it would make a thermal effect if you ran it really hot. But we just kept the short pulses, and we found it was just instant. The thermal effects took several seconds to develop. So we had a very clean experiment. It was very simple, and all you need is a good 100-watt amplifier and tone generator to get you like 400 hertz, or A4 is 450 hertz, and you can demonstrate this in your garage. We built a little like a phone, kind of phone booth sized, kind of a booth to keep the air still, so the balloon could just sit there and you could hang this little coil with little wires feeding to it. Very thin wires, thinner the better. And then we turn on, and it would the coil would get lighter, and the balloon would rise. Turn it off, the coil would sink again, and there was no way this is electromagnetic interference. The only thing that was being electromagnetically interfered with was gravity itself. So it was a very clean experiment, and in the APEC conference on August 31st, I presented all of this because suddenly the people I used to deal with back in DC, suddenly the flagman from holding up the sign that says stop, suddenly he put out the sign that says go fast. We were waved ahead. Now, this is part of, I believe, the government disclosure process. We're demonstrating, changes of 1 part in 1,000 of gravity. But we shouldn't be able to change gravity at all using conventional theory. This is a revolutionary new effect. I call it the gem effect. And so the government wants it out now. They want it available to everybody. I posted it, and you can find it on YouTube. The APEC conference, APEC, Tim Ventura. It's and it's gravity modification on the 31st of August of this year. You can find it on YouTube. Just do gravity modification Brandenburg APEC AEPEC conference, and I gave people an absolute cookbook for doing this in their own garage, and that's what I want them to do.
Well,
I want everybody to know that this can be done by anybody.
Before
or
we
let's
do that, though, I have a few questions.
you have, oh
questions.
yeah, oh yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Just to like handle the safety of it.
Only
All right.
only a few questions, Sean. You must be a real genius if you only have a few questions.
Well, first of all, what's happening to space time theoretically in this experiment?
Well, space time.
Is space time compressing above this thing and then expanding beneath it?
Well, actually, I have a diagram in the talk, and it shows. Imagine gravity lines of force. Everybody's
Mhm.
aware of electric lines of force and magnetic lines of force. Let's say gravity. Let's talk just Newtonian gravity has lines of force, and you
And by the
when
way,
you
the
pull.
reason I'm asking about this is because for safety, right? Because if there's space compression and space expansion, somebody could get hit with a dose of something from a gravitational blue shift, right?
Uh, well, these effects are very tiny.
Okay.
These are one in a thousand, one
But there's
part per
still
thousand.
shift. It's just very tiny and it's not enough to like
No,
knock.
it's not. It shouldn't be enough to shift red light into ultraviolet or X-rays or something like
Oh,
that.
all right. I just want to make
This
sure.
is a okay. And so what happens is
Suddenly people get turbo cancer in their garages. We just want to make sure that they're.
well, I mean, you can do fusion experiments in your garage. All you need is some chicken wire and window screen and a high voltage generator, and people are doing it, and they're making neutrons, which are it's gonna give them leukemia if they're not careful. So don't do this at home. Please know what you're doing when you do this. Now, um, and somebody's asking if this can lead to warp drive. This
Yes.
same effect, yes, can lead to warp drive, but right now we're just doing what's called, what you would call anti-gravity. Gravity is space-time having, a slight curve to it. And we're changing the curvature a little tiny bit. We're doing it for less than $200. Go down to a pawn shop and get a audio amplifier for like a electric guitar or something, or a PA system, and just get a tone generator that gives you 450 hertz. You ought to be able to see this. So, and then buy a balloon, a Mylar balloon from your local grocery store, and a little toy motor armature, and disable. They normally have 3 lobes. Just disable 2 of the lobes and just use one. And so this can be done by anybody who wants to do it. And spending, the only thing is, if they have a nice audio amp already, it's not gonna cost them really basically anything. Now, then we've also found if we took these new brushless model motors, they have a beautiful coil arrangement to make this rotating field using 3-phase. And we finally took one of those coils. We bought one of those motors, and I told people the brand we bought and everything like that. And we took out the rotor. We don't want the rotor. We just want the field to spin. And we hung that from a load cell, which is a electronic measuring device. You do very, very precise changes in weight of just something hanging by a nylon filament from beneath it. And because the coil is hanging away from the load cell, there's no way it could be talking to the load cell electronically. And in fact, we tested that. We supported the coil a little bit, so it was only have a tiny amount of weight on the load cell, and then we turned it on and off. It didn't affect the load cell at all. But when we just left it hanging and turned the power on and off, the coil would lose weight. Then we turn off the power and we would regain the weight and go back to normal. And by the way, you should keep the pulses short, because if you start running for a long time, I would keep pulses to like 5 seconds or less, because if you start running things hot, then they start getting hot. That creates thermal effects in the atmosphere, You don't want those, and you don't want to cook the materials. They have these very nice laminated iron things, and if you cook the iron, it loses a lot of its magnetic properties. So just keep 5-second pulses, and so you can, for less than $200, you can do these experiments and demonstrate that gravity modification is possible. And that's what the government wants everybody to know. Now, if you do that with $200 or less, just imagine what you could do with 200 billion in the black budget.
So why
And
have they kept
apparently,
this stuff? I mean, it seems like it's simple enough to do. Why have they
it's
kept this
simple enough
stuff
to do.
so secret for
I,
so
I could
long?
tell you how to do. I could tell you how to do it if you want to do it. And it's like I did everything. I just gave everybody a cookbook. In fact, I showed a chef's hat. I said, I'm going to give you guys a cookbook. Put on your chef's hat and do exactly what I tell you to do. None of this spinning stuff with compressed air or something like this, which debunkers do, professional debunkers. And no, so you want to do this, and we've entered the age of gravity modification, publicly known. The U.S. government, Uncle Sammy, has known about this for a long time, and has, I won't speculate on how long he has known this. But by the way, if you want to build something that, if you want to take this effect and really make it so it's complete anti-gravity, so it's completely nullifying gravity, it takes some good engineering, electrical engineering. You got to power it. Probably best way to power it was a turbojet turbo alternator, which needs air, by the way, to breathe, or you could fuel it with liquid oxygen and some fuel, so you could fly into space for short distances. But the craft you come up with theoretically looks like an upside down satellite dish with 3 bumps on the bottom. The 3 bumps are the 3 phases of Tesla's rotating power. Next time you drive by some big high tension lines in the distance, notice they're in groups of 3. The ones that are on the insulators, the real high voltage. By the way, they always have a cable stretching between the towers that's just grounded to the towers, and that's lightning protection, to protect the power cables from lightning. And so lightning goes to that and goes to ground. Lightning doesn't care about the power. It just wants to go to ground. And so, but you'll notice the industrial power for big motors and a lot of other processes goes as 3-phase Tesla power, invented by Nikola Tesla. And so it's 3-phase, and it creates rotating electromagnetic fields. I call it a Tesla pointing vortex because it sounds cool. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're gonna do just to run a motor, you make one of these rotating electromagnetic fields, and you put a piece of metal in there. You don't need brushes and commutators and things like this. All you need is good bearings, and it just spins with the field. But if you take out the rotor and you want to achieve anti-gravity modification, then we call this a TVP, which is a Tesla. No, it's a TPV, Tesla pointing vortex. There, sounds cool. So anyone can do this. All they have to do is be good at following directions and have some knowledge of electrical stuff. And I'm hoping that people soon I'll be getting reports. I'm going to be going to a conference in Arcata, California, and I'm going to present these results at a big, in-person scientific conference. And I'm hoping that by that time, that'll be in late October, almost end of October, I'm hoping by that time that somebody has actually reproduced this and shows up at the conference. And by the way, I'm used to bare knuckle brawls, intellectual brawls at these conferences. If somebody shows up and says, I tried your stuff and it didn't work, I'll just say, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you follow my directions? And they'll probably, I used compressed air instead of electricity because it was cheaper. I had an air compressor, and so we can do this thing. And what you realize is Uncle Sammy has had this technology probably for a long time. In fact, here's the thing, what they call string theory. The chief string theorist in this country is a guy named Ed Witten. His pop was a specialist in anti-gravity for the government. So string theory, they have gaslit the entire scientific establishment now for 40 years. The US government, by the way it appropriates money, determines the research agenda academics can't just work on what they want. I worked at a university. I'd never worked at a place that was more money grubbing than that university. If you didn't bring it, it didn't matter if you were a good teacher. It didn't matter if you were chasing your female grad students around the desk. As long as you brought in lots of grant money. That's all they cared about. And so if you can't bring in grant money, you're dead. You'll never get tenure. Or if you get tenure and become an assistant professor, then you can't become a full professor without more grant money. So the government can determine academia and how it. So they've made the term anti-gravity to be, so-called bad science, and they've had people working on theories of everything. When all we need is a good theory to unify gravity and electromagnetism, so we can control gravity with electromagnetism. I have tried to develop a theory. So is Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff's theory and my theory are very similar. In fact, you can derive a similar equation for anti-gravity from Hal Puthoff's theory. And I've said that. Hal's one of my big heroes because he's a superb physicist in addition to being into remote viewing and things like that. Mm-hmm. So what it is the government, a faction within the government wants disclosure to happen. It's apparently an alliance among, and by the way, one of the leaders of that alliance is apparently the CIA.
Oh, it's like the CIA and the Navy.
The CIA and the Navy want disclosure, and apparently the Defense Intelligence Agency, the cousin to the DIA, the cousin to the CIA, and the Navy wants disclosure. You notice all these videos of the Tic Tac UFOs and stuff like that.
Navy.
That's all from the Navy. Gary Nolan from Stanford, the guy who's been reporting on all these, fighter pilots who were had brain trauma after encountering UFOs. He works under contract to the CIA and the Navy because it was Navy pilots he was treating. So the Air Force, you'll notice, has been absolutely silent on this whole thing.
Yeah, the Chair Force. That's right.
The Chair Force. Well, Hey, my pop was Army Air Corps. When it comes to a real war, the air crews, the real air crews, take a higher casualty rate than just about anybody. So I deeply respect the fighter pilots. They got to go up and do night intercepts of UFOs, and many of them have not come back. That to me, that is real heroism. But the Air Force as an organization apparently is fully committed to the cover up. They're basically in the Führer bunker mode.
Well, that's good news, because maybe we can disband them and then just use the Space Force to take on all their old missions.
I'm not going to comment any further. I've known a lot of really fine people from the Air Force. I will say, however, I had 2 conversations with Air Force officers, one of them in uniform. And we were discussing the subject of UFOs, and he said, both of them said, if it came to a war between the UFO aliens and us, we would fight for the aliens because they have superior technology. And this guy was in uniform one of them was in uniform when he said that. And he kind of said it in a joking way.
Yeah,
But
it's not funny.
If Hap Arnold, the head chief of the Air Corps in World War II, had been there, he would have strangled him personally for saying that. And no, but the pilots, the fighter pilots.
Who's the other guy? The Air Force general, Curtis LeMay.
Curtis LeMay. Either one of those guys, Hap Arnold or Kurt LeMay, would have.
Curtis LeMay would have fed him into a buzzsaw if he said anything like that.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely. I was just so astonished at this guy's statement in uniform that I didn't know what to say. And so there are factions within the government, some of which are pushing for disclosure, and some that don't want it to happen till doomsday. In particular, one of the problems that we have is some of these people are afraid they're going to be legally liable if disclosure occurs. That's why, and I know there are people in the community really disagree with this point of view, but I am for a blanket pardon for anybody in the UFO cover-up who will cooperate with disclosure.
I was with you in 2023, but after 2023, that their time has passed.
Well, I'm interested in fighting the aliens, to tell you the truth, or at least some of the aliens.
We'll get to fight them anyway, but we should
we'll get it. Yeah,
throw some Quizlings off of helicopters before we have to do.
You know, by the way, the first place you see human traitors, traitors to the human race, is in a Japanese movie called The Mysterians, where they not only have Japanese women being kidnapped into flying saucers and abducted, and hybridization experiments, underground UFO bases, and human traitors, guys who are so mesmerized by the alien technology that they've decided to side with them rather than the rest of the human race. And so I highly recommend that movie, Mysterians, to everybody. It's made by the same bunch that made the Godzilla movie, same folks. So they actually have a giant monster robot at one point. It's like they couldn't help themselves. But anyway,
by the way,
was just absolutely stunning Japanese women in that movie too.
By the way, 2 quick questions from the audience. The first one was, have you ever worked with Amy Eskridge?
I had the pleasure of talking with her several times at meetings, and I find her death very suspicious. And God will get whoever did this. There, that's all I'm going to say. I thought
I'm just going to add that. I was just going to add that kind of just reinforces my perspective on.
I understand. It's, yeah. If the people let's just say that she met with foul play, and the people involved worked for the UFO cover-up. That would be a hard one to, let's just say hypothetically, that would be a hard.
Right.
I would not want to be in charge of that case. But
Yeah, because we
in
don't know. I
general,
mean, like to be fair, we don't know. We don't know what really happened. But if it
we
was
don't
foul
we
play,
don't know what really happened. According to what I heard, she was shot with a single bullet through the top of the head, and that it was ruled a suicide. She had laundry in the dryer drying when this happened. This was yeah, and I knew some people who tried to investigate, and very quickly they decided it probably better not try to investigate. They ran into a real wall with local authorities, and it's near Huntsville. And anyway, it was a terrible thing. She was just a lovely person.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed talking to her and discussing all these issues with her. So moving on from that sad point.
Well, the second question was: is the Air Force holding more material than other groups?
I have no idea. All I was just I knew people who knew people involved in the cover up. That's all I can, I was never read into any program concerning that, and I wrote a science fiction novel about it, and I basically got permission to do that. I just said I'd like to write a science fiction novel about some of the stuff I heard around the coffee machine and the water cooler. And the people I worked with who were in the intel community said it was my farewell luncheon. I was leaving to work down to Kennedy Space Center from Washington, D.C. And they said, John, that would be really interesting. We'll read your novel, and just make sure it's labeled science fiction. That's all they said. Make sure you label it science fiction. And so I did that, and I did get the comment from one of the people I used to work with who read the novel and said, John, I like your novel. And he said, how did you get so much stuff? How did you get so much information to put in the novel? And I said, I just connected the dots. I didn't know much of anything. I had enough dots that I could start connecting them. And he says, well, you connected the dots really well, he said. So, that obscure school of literary criticism endorsed my novel. Hal Puthoff read it. It's called Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. And the UFO cover-up in that novel is brought down by two brave women who are, they're news anchors, television news anchors. So of course they're very glamorous. And one is Asian, one is blonde. And the Asian grew up rich in San Diego and went to USC, got a 4-year degree in journalism, and then became a local newscaster in San Diego and LA. And the blonde grew up in Cleveland and got a 2-year degree in something, from Cuyahoga Community College, and ended up as a weather girl. Because so her start out in the television news was to be a weather girl, and she gradually managed to become a news anchor person. But both of them, they work together as a team and bring down the UFO cover-up. They do, and head of the UFO cover-up dismisses their efforts. He says nobody's going to pay any attention to those two bimbos. 6 months later, he's dead, and his entire thing is devastated. One of the things that happens in there, by the way, is when the UFO cover-up really starts falling apart because of these two women. It's interesting. They decide to. The Asian has this drives this nice sports car, Maserati or something, and she's kind of at loose ends one night. Her friend is doing late night news, and so she goes out to this restaurant and parks her car in a parking lot with a parking lot attendant. Goes and has some dinner in an Ethiopian restaurant, and then leaves. And these government people come to her and say, "Look, there's a contract out on you now. I mean, the UFO cover-up people have decided they want to kill you and your friend. So come with us." And she says, "I'm not going anywhere with you people." She actually knows them by this point. And just as she's arguing with them, she hands the Asian American parking lot attendant her keys to get her car. Parking lot attendant starts her car and it blows up. So she's reported as dead for about an hour. They think they find a dead Asian American in the car. And so she comes marching into the studio at the newscast where she's employed, and goes immediately on the air. And she says, "Reports of my death have been highly exaggerated." She's they're both real smart Alex. So anyway, so that triggers the government. The Congress decides they have to have a big investigation, and so they have an investigation, and one of the exhibits is a dead alien hybrid in alcohol. They bring that out under a cover and uncover it for everybody to see. And so the cover-up starts to really actually just fall apart in Washington, D.C. And so the secret government stages an attempted coup d'etat. Tanks in the streets. Because they say the UFO cover-up is too big to fail. And I won't tell you what happens next. Oh, they also issued an arrest warrant for the two women as threats to national security. So anyway, it's Morning Star Pass, the collapse of the UFO cover-up. And Hal Puthoff read it. It's a big novel, and he said, "This is War and Peace." And he's Russian American. That was a really great compliment. And somebody else, another guy, called it War and Peace. It's long.
Do you still correspond with Puthoff?
Oh yeah, periodically, yes. When I write a new article, I always send him a copy. And we have been talking now for almost 40 years. So
without saying anything,
he's on the inside, I'm kind of on the outside.
Yeah, that's what I figured. He never says anything. He never says anything that would get him into trouble for good reason. But I've always had the sense that he knows.
He's a good soldier, and he's a team player, and so am I. I mean, I had this was completely unrelated to the UFO situation. I came up with a great idea from writing a science fiction story for a class I was taking, and just story writing. And I managed to turn it into, and I thought, gee, I could build one of these things. So I got some money from the Air Force to build it. And I got more money, and we got everything working really well. And then an Air Force colonel told me, he said, "Dr. Brandenburg, we don't want you working on this anymore, and I can't tell you why." And I said, "Yes, sir." And because I'm a team player. I mean, I'm part of the nation's defense establishment. And what I realized is they'd taken the program black. Now, I hope my thing that I developed has contributed strongly to the nation's defense, but I couldn't work on it anymore, and that's okay. So I know what it's like to get a tap on the shoulder, and I know one guy who was working on something that bordered on something classified, and he got the tap on the shoulder to be told to cease and desist. Not only did he tell the government to go to hell, he hired an Iranian graduate student to help him work on it. They threw him in prison.
Mm-hmm.
They found some reason to throw him in. They found some reason to throw him in prison for 5 years, I guess. Here he is, a college professor, suddenly hauled away for doing research he's not supposed to do, especially involving it, and involving an Iranian student in it. And so, if they did that as an example to people like me to mind our manners, it was quite effective. I hear prison food is terrible. So
Yeah, I think Rob Young's mentioning here the Nuclear Secrets Act. I think there's like two. There's like the Nuclear Secrets Act, and then there's
yes,
the 1917 Espionage Act. And for between the two of them, they can pretty much throw you away for anything they want. You looked at me funny. You've just violated the Espionage Act.
yeah. I mean, and I back in 1980, the details of how the hydrogen bomb worked were classified. The radiation implosion method, which you can now read about on Wikipedia, that was classified. And a fellow named Friedwart Winterberg figured it out, just that this would be a great way to make a hydrogen bomb. So he started saying that in conference papers, and the government told him to shut the hell up. And they got more and more angry with him, and finally they would just block his papers because they controlled the organizations that ran these conferences, and so he couldn't present his work at any conferences. And I remember he actually came as a visitor to Lawrence Livermore Lab, and he was talking to my thesis advisor. And my thesis advisor said, Friedwart, that was his name. He was German. He was a German. He said, Friedwart, we already know how to build hydrogen bombs. I mean, the government's already got patents on and everything like that. Why don't you work on something like trying to make fusion power to light light bulbs rather than blow up cities? And this guy was just very stubborn. You can understand why some of the German units kept fighting even after Hitler was dead for another week. This guy just got in his head that he wanted to publish this idea. And finally, enough people figured out the radiation implosion method just from stuff in the open literature that the government finally just declassified it. In fact, a visiting Japanese scientist, I was working at the lab at the time. I was finishing my PhD, and this visiting Japanese scientist, who was kind of a smart aleck, showed me a picture of, that had been published by this Winterberg guy, and said, would you like to comment on this picture? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, and then the next week they declassified everything. He said, well, why wouldn't you, it's been confirmed. Why wouldn't you talk? And I said, once you see pictures of Marilyn Monroe with no clothes on, you've seen them. There's no more mystery. So why are you even asking me, And so anyway,
The question for you.
when you work with the government, well, okay, Dr. Farrell, last Ripple 2 tech from last hydrogen bomb test. Oh, you know, when they set off hydrogen bombs, especially, you know, the first couple of times they tried to set them off, one of them was the Castle Bravo test. It was supposed to be 5 megatons. Instead, it was 15. I mean, guys were soiling their jeans standing on the ships because they realized the ships are too damn close to this hydrogen bomb test. The fireball just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, they barely knew what they were doing. They got the hydrogen bomb to work. In fact, they discovered that it was easier to make work than they thought. And then they, you know, I know they took a lot of tests, and so I'd rather not comment on Ripple 2. I don't know what Ripple wine is from my first year of college, but actually we preferred Boone's Farm, but Ripple was there if you were really, really thirsty. And so I can't really comment on it.
Just as the last
test was 99% free. That's because they set it off underground. Ground absorbed radiation. You know, was it an underground test? I don't know. That
sounds like a neutron bomb to me, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, well, there's the neutron bombs make radiation. They make neutrons. That was the whole idea. And you know, they were basically fine-tuned to make a lot of neutrons. Remember there was the big test they had up at Amchatka, where they set a 5 megaton hydrogen bomb at Amchatka, right on an earthquake fault line, by the way. But it was the Cold War, and they were serious.
Yes, Russians do, as the Russians do, right?
I mean, you know, hey, there was always grudge during the Cold War. There was always a certain amount of grudging admiration for the Russians, because they would do things that they needed to do, and I realized my government does the same thing. If the situation calls for sending penal battalions through minefields to clear them, I know our government would do the same thing. That would probably be the last thing we would do, but we would do it too.
So Ashton Forbes is asking,
why is the government hiding free energy for this long? Well, in addition to putting all the electric power companies out of business, now here, Ashton.
Well, first of all, do they have it? Like 0 point energy, something like that. Vacuum energy.
As a physicist, you know, and by the way, plasma physics relates to finally astrophysics. You know, everything from the Big Bang and everything that happened afterwards.
I thought you were going to say from the Big Bang afterwards. There's not much of an afterwards.
The Big Bang.
Anyway, yeah.
No, anyway, yeah, we'll talk about the bong later. But
you probably should. You probably triggered the algorithm. Go ahead. Sorry, Ashton.
Okay, Ashton, I'm going to tell you how to build a free energy, vacuum energy power plant. First, get a tiny black hole. Then find, BBs or rabbit pellets or something like this, and start feeding them to this little miniature black hole. As they fall into the black hole, they'll get really hot and burst into plasmas. And some of the plasma will go into the black hole, making it bigger. But some of it will escape, and you can use a MHD generator to generate electricity from the stuff bursting out of the this little miniature explosion you create when you feed matter into this little black hole. Now, you have this little black hole in your basement, and you can generate energy from just this. All you have to do is keep feeding it matter. It's like Little Shop of Horrors. All you do, as long as you have plenty of food for it, it's happy. And you can generate power from nothing with that miniature black hole. Now, what happens if the black hole falls out of its containment vessel and hits the floor and starts eating through the floor and finally falls into the center of the earth, eating itself all the way? And then finally it swallows the entire earth and turns it into a giant black hole. So your free energy, yes, you have a free energy generator, but it is far too dangerous. I mean, at CERN, they believe they actually do make little black holes, but because of the Hawking black hole evaporation theorem, they actually evaporate into gamma rays very quickly, or other particles. But there's an example of getting energy from the vacuum. But the problem is it's far. Let me put it this way, the universe exploits physics to make energy. The simplest thing is the fusion energy that powers the stars and the sun. And then finally, you find colliding black holes out there that generate big flashes of light. They've now got two black holes colliding and generating a flash of light. It was brighter than the brightest supernova. And they can't explain that because that would mean you're turning gravity energy into electromagnetic energy. And supposedly that's not possible unless you have a unified field theory. So generally, nature will exploit sources of energy to run itself. And if you want to know what zero-point energy looks like, it looks like a black hole eating things there. So, Ashton, perhaps there's a way to tame a black hole in the lab, but unfortunately, here's another example. If you're down on the bottom of the ocean, you're under tremendous pressure, and you think, gee, if I could just hook this pressure up to a turbine, I could generate all this power. But I'll get to your sonoluminescence just a minute. But the fact is that the high pressure you're sitting under at the bottom of the ocean, there's no way to send that, have that pressure go to an outlet and pass through a turbine. You're surrounded by the same pressure all the time. And that means there's no pressure relief. In order to generate power, you need to have a kind of region of pressure and then a region of no pressure, and then take advantage of the flow between them to do work. You got to do work to make energy, work and energy. And so basically, we're sitting in a sea of energy. According to quantum mechanics, we're sitting into the sea of electromagnetic energy, but we can't directly perceive it. If we could, we would be vaporized. So, and part of the theory I worked on, the gem theory, explains why that is so. Why the electromagnetic energy self-censors itself, basically. So I'm just trying to explain to you, Ashton, that that free energy is something. I think the best source of free energy is a black hole, and those are too dangerous to use to generate power on Earth. Even if you put it in orbit around the Earth, there's always a chance to it and run into the Earth and swallow it up. You think fission nuclear reactors like Fukushima are dangerous? a black hole power plant would be a million times more dangerous. But that wouldn't stop executives in three-piece suits from the power companies assuring you that it's completely safe. You know. So, by the way, you also had a question about sonoluminescence. I think sonoluminescence is a very fascinating thing, and I believe that sonoluminescence could be a path to generating fusion power if you could figure out how to make it work really, really well. Basically, when these bubbles collapse, when the sound wave pressure drops to zero, the bubbles collapse, and you have all of this matter rushing in and colliding with itself, forming a ball of plasma. But you know, the reports that we actually could generate fusion power through that. Yes, Ashton, I did see your program that you did on my gem theory. I was highly honored that you would look at that. And but the gem theory basically just tells you how to make electromagnetism and gravity kind of interchangeable. It also explains for why the universe started out as vacuum, and then 1 second later was a ball of hydrogen, expanding fireball of hydrogen plasma. Basically just two particles, electrons and protons. So, but I will, by the way, I've discussed the experiments we did using the gem theory. And the gem theory basically just provided kind of overall guidance. Finally, you have to just go in the lab and measure what you can produce. Even the gem theory gives you equations that have kind of undetermined coefficients in them, and you basically just have to go check those experimentally. Just like the Bernoulli equation, around airflow around wings, there's a lot of things like in the boundary layer that you can adjust, and those aren't in the Bernoulli equation. You have to basically just use a wind tunnel, believe it or not, and ultimately build an airplane and see if it'll actually fly. There are things that look like they're fine with the Bernoulli equation, but your airplane your wing will not survive in a wind tunnel if you follow that. So there are a lot of things that are simply what you call phenomenology. You know, going into the lab and exploring a phenomenon and just getting the numbers from the experiments. The Wright brothers did not know what the Bernoulli equation, they didn't know anything about the Bernoulli equation. They had bird wings, they knew birds could fly, and they had a wind tunnel. So they designed the wings of their Wright Flyer based on wind tunnel designs. It took the Germans in World War I to actually use the Bernoulli equation to design a very effective wing, and they almost achieved air superiority for a little while because they had better wings on their planes, and finally the Allies shot down a few of their planes and copied their wings and discovered yes, it's yes, Ashton, I'll get to your questions in just a minute. There's a lot of things that theory can, you know, you can have the equation E equals mc squared, but to actually use that equation, you have to go in the lab and really get things to work. You have to just, you know, you have to split uranium atoms, and the cover of my book, Cosmic Awakening, I have two women on the cover who are quite lovely. One of them is Hitler's channeler, this
Orsic, Maria Orsic.
Yeah, Maria Orsic. She was
Mhm.
really looked like a movie star.
Mhm.
And she disappeared after the war, by the way. They were looking, the British and American intelligence were looking for her. and nobody ever found her. I think she managed to get a plane ticket to Argentina. She told Hitler that aliens from Aldebaran were going to come help him win the war, basically. That may be one reason he kept fighting for he wouldn't, even though they'd lost the war, he kept fighting. But the other woman on the cover is Lise Meitner. She was the woman who discovered nuclear power. She had been working with the experimentalists, Otto Hahn, and she figured out that you could build an atomic bomb or a nuclear reactor, that you could split uranium atoms and it would lead to a chain reaction. She figured it all out, but she was Jewish. They should have given her the Nobel Prize, but she was Jewish. She fled Germany when Hitler came to power and sought as a political refugee in Sweden. And the Swedes thought of giving her a Nobel Prize, but the Swedes thought the Germans were going to win the war, basically. So they didn't give her because she was Jewish. The Americans, the British, by the way, volunteered to, try and smuggle her out of Sweden to come to the United States to work on the atomic bomb. And she said she did not want to work on the atomic bomb. But her nephew, Fersch, who helped her, he worked on the atomic bomb, but she wouldn't. So she had to wait till the war was over, basically, to be allowed to leave Sweden. And so she, there are all these pictures of her being in Sweden, and she's never smiling. The only pictures I have of her smiling was after the war. The Germans had been, the Nazis had been defeated. Then she smiled. And but anyway, we're all looking for shortcuts to get fusion energy now. I mean, I've worked out this gem theory to do gravity modification. I would love to work on it some more, especially if the government now is basically saying it's okay to work in the open literature on this. And I hope, yes.
What do you think has changed?
I don't know. Suddenly something has changed. And, I was told to hurry up, concentrate on this, drop everything else. So that's what I did. So I gave a conference on I attended a virtual conference and presented all my work. Presented it so that it's on YouTube. Anybody can build one of these experiments. And it's we discovered this effect in 1998. It's been almost 30 years since we discovered it, and now we're being told it's okay to publish it. By the way, I actually got a $200,000 grant from DARPA to work on my gem theory. That was only like 2 years ago. That ended, and one of their conditions, they said, we're going to give you this money. We want you to, refine your theory and give us a nice report. I said, yes, sir. And, and they said, we're going to give you a $200,000 grant, supported me for like 2 years to work on this. And then they said, and we don't want you to do any experiments. Do you understand us, Dr. Brandenburg? Yes, sir. Please sign my check. I just knew that was, fortunately, we'd done experiments already. These little experiments, garage and simple laboratory experiments. So we knew the effect was there, but they told us we couldn't do any experiments in the GEM investigation. By the way, I handed in the final report. I made a big final report to them, and their money helped me smooth out the theory. So there were certain little rough spots in it. And I got everything all worked out. So I'm very pleased with the result. They were very pleased with my final presentation, but basically I handed the report to the chief of the program, and he said, "Thank you, Dr. Brandenburg. Don't let the door hit you on the way out of the building." And my interpretation of this is they wanted to know what I knew. Very good. They wanted to know what somebody like me doing just entirely open research could figure out from first principles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and some experimental, I got some pointers from the experiments to develop the theory. So I delivered that to DARPA, and they said, "Good, thank you." So I asked for some more money to do experiments and stuff like that. I'm sorry, it's time for lunch. We can't discuss this any further. That's what they basically told me. In fact, the guy who was in charge of the getting me the money then retired from DARPA. So, and I've tried to reach him by phone. I can't reach him by phone. So that's okay. I'm a team player. Okay. I've been working with these people for 50 years. And so it all turned out very well. And now we've been waved ahead. So I'm hoping to get money to do some more experiments to amplify this effect. But at the same time, I know people from the DoD may come tap me on the shoulder and say, "Please don't publish this. You've gone too far." They want the idea of laboratory demonstrations of very small effects to be published. They want that. As far as making flying carpets, something like that, I'm pretty sure that they would not want that kind of technology out in the open. They might give me a bus ticket to Site 51 that's a one-way ticket and say, "Well, thank you for volunteering to work at Site 51." And,
so this stuff comes out, then what?
well, now we know the secret of why things flying around looking like discs with bumps on the bottom, particularly, or triangles. The three-phase power. You can just see the triangles. Why those can fly. Now so the mystery there is gone. It's like we've been watching somebody fly airplanes around for a while, and now we've got our own airplanes. We figured out how to make an airplane. And so it's part of the reason I wrote the book, Cosmic Awakening, and I will confess, it's kind of a little bit of an intellectual book. If somebody wants to just read a book about whiz-bang stuff about UFOs, UAPs, or whatever they want to call them, the book does discuss that in detail. But basically, the book is about what is our cosmic situation and what is human destiny in the cosmos. And I believe it'll look like Star Trek. So I'm very optimistic about the future. And so there are apparently people out in the stars who are basically just human beings. They have the same genetic makeup as we do. We could intermarry and have children. And I'm not talking about hybridization, which is, something with some biotechnology kludge. we're talking about just, you know, we're talking about Spock
The
in
old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way.
the
That's what we're talking about.
old-fashioned way. I mean, his father was Vulcan and his mother was an Earth girl, and they, you know, the Vulcans and the humans could have children together. There, that was in Star Trek, and they had a lot of other races in Star Trek who were basically just human, and so much that they could have children together. And and that, by the way, was introduced first in Walt Disney's Moon Pilot movie. What you can find out is that one path of disclosure that the government has followed is to um, make Hollywood movies with interesting plot lines, and one of them, one entertaining one, is called Moon Pilot, and it's about an astronaut who's being prepared to go on a mission to do a loop around the moon, you know, do a figure eight around the moon, come back to Earth. And he's approached by this lovely woman. She has brown hair, by the way, and brown eyes. She's auburn hair and brown eyes. And she says, your radiation protection on your capsule is insufficient. You're going to end up getting killed. Here, tell your people at NASA that they have to put this coating on your capsule to increase its radiation. And she's not from Earth, but she looks just like any Earth woman, a rather lovely one. And the government's finally chasing her, trying to figure out where she's from. And but anyway, they end up falling in love and getting married and having children together. And he does his space mission successfully, and comes back alive and well, and has marries her and has children. So that was a Walt Disney movie made in 1961, I believe, or 62. And we know that Walt Disney was working closely with the government on the moon program. And he worked with Werner von Braun, who certainly was very cognizant of everything that was going on. So one of the things in Star Trek was the Prime Directive, and also then this odd thing that they commented that there's all these people out there in the stars who are basically human beings genetically, and we don't understand why that is. That was a thing that they would dwell upon in several Star Trek episodes. It wasn't just they were trying to save money on makeup in the special effects department. They actually had the phenomenon in Star Trek that there were a lot of very humanoid extraterrestrials. So humanoid they could intermarry with humans and have children who were perfectly normal and, in fact, exceptional. Spock was exceptional. He was exceptional even for a Vulcan, and he's certainly exceptional for, you know, he was caught between two cultures, but he was, you know, he had a reputation for being one of the smartest people in the galaxy, and he didn't belong to either world. He wanted to be a good Vulcan, but the Vulcans wouldn't accept him as one of their own. So he hung out with the humans, who were annoying, but at least put up with him. And and Nurse Chapel had a crush on him. So you know, the universe apparently is a complicated place, just like the Earth, and we're not alone in the universe. I'm talking the book Cosmic Awakening. I'll just summarize it very quickly. Basically, you can summarize it with like three sentences. We're not alone in the universe. Other people have developed space travel and had it for a lot longer than we have. And the third point is they're just like the Earth has good and bad people on it. The rest of the universe is the same way. It's got some people who are very friendly to humans and some people who are extremely unpleasant. And as an added note, I'll just say that, in fact, I got trashed. One of the first review on my book is some troll who accused me of never watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers, where they bring down the flying saucers by disrupting their anti-gravity drives with a microwave, kind of a beam of radio, very powerful beam of radio waves, disrupts their electromagnetic gravity drives. And this guy accused me of never watching the movie because he says everybody knows that this is done with sound waves. He's the guy who's never watched the movie. So anyway, I got trashed by this one troll who didn't like my. But what's interesting, one of the major points of the book was that Roswell was a military clash between the government. We all know that the UFOs are reported to have a lot of interest in our nuclear weapons, both in us and the Russians. And yeah, Earth versus Flying Saucer, great movie. And if you watched it, it's electromagnetism they're using to bring down saucers, not sound waves. They experiment with sound waves and decide they're not powerful enough. But here's the thing: is if you have somebody who, like me, writes a book about cosmic realities, there's some people who don't like reality. And for all I know, he works for the UFO cover-up. What's interesting is in my book, one of the major features is, it's the subtitle. This is The Cosmic Awakening, What Really Happened at Roswell and the Genesis of the UFO Cover-Up. Roswell was a shoot down. We all know that UFOs are very interested in our nuclear stockpile. In 1947, our nuclear stockpile consisted of 5 nuclear weapons at Roswell, New Mexico. Those were all the nuclear weapons on Earth. The Russians hadn't invented nuclear weapons yet, and we only had 5 of them, and they were sitting at Roswell to complete with the B-29 bombers to carry them. And suddenly the UFOs who were being seen all over the country were suddenly hovering over Roswell. So the government, this is a government, by the way, that had just finished World War II. World War II was not even 2 years. It had not even been 2 years since World War II had ended. The US government remembered Pearl Harbor and remembered the Battle of the Bulge. It had just lost 500,000 men in the war, and they were not going to horse around with anybody from outer space. So they had combat air patrols over Roswell, apparently consisting of P-61 Black Widow propeller-driven night fighters from World War II. That was the only night fighter we had that could fly through a thunderstorm. We had jet fighters, but they were completely restricted to daylight flying because the jet fighters were very, very fragile in those days, and they couldn't put an onboard radar on a jet fighter in those days. The radars were too bulky and heavy. But they had squeezed one on to this P-61 Black Widow. P-61 Black Widow was very effective. In fact, it was the last shoot down of an enemy plane during World War II was by a P-61 Black Widow. It was the day before the armistice with the Japanese was signed. And why can't anti-gravity be used to generate electricity? Well, it takes electricity to make anti-gravity, friend. I'm certain there's some real tricks to this, but we're dealing, the stuff I have been able to work with is just very tiny effects. 1 part in 1,000, changing gravity fields by 1 part in 1,000. Now, even that should be impossible. You ask some scientists from CERN, is it possible to change local gravity by a part per thousand using electromagnetism, he'll say, no, you have to use, why have I built this big accelerator if you could do it that easy? They mainstream science says that's impossible. And that's because the US government has basically, decided that they didn't want people exploring that idea. The UFO cover-up was more important than advancing science. And that's the way it's been. This government now is running a Mars cover-up, a lunar cover-up. By the way, if you want to see bases on the far side of the moon supporting UFOs, just watch The Mysterians. It's in The Mysterians movie, made in 1957, apparently with advice from the CIA. And if you want to see the first animal mutilations and human mutilations associated with UFOs, watch The Thing from Another World. He drains all the blood out of his victims, human or animal. Played by James Arness, by the way, is the chief alien. And that was then found in the cattle mutilations. All the blood would be drained out of these cattle. With somehow they managed to push all the blood out of the animals without causing their veins to all collapse. I don't even know how to do that. That's something that you develop in a Nazi death camp. But somebody's been doing that for years out in Colorado, New Mexico, and even in Oregon, where I live now. And but that was depicted for the first time in 1951 in The Thing from Another World. So so Hollywood has been a way that the US government has tried to create disclosure. Movies like Independence Day. There is the rumor. Let's not call it a rumor anymore. It's a report by Canadians, by a Canadian scientist who worked in their government as a defense secretary or the head of the Israeli space program, which is all military, and various people in this country that we had a secret treaty with a group of aliens. By the way, the signing of that treaty, if you want to know how Hollywood reacted to that, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Of course, they have this big love fest with the little short gray aliens. That was apparently that treaty reportedly was made in the late 60s, just at the time when Project Blue Book went out of business. If you saw a UFO, finally, there was no one to call. You couldn't call the Air Force and report it. They no longer had an office that would take reports. They published the Condon report saying there's nothing to the UFO thing. And so apparently this treaty was done then. Hollywood celebrated it with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then apparently this did not work out very well. And they had an armed clash, reportedly at a place called Dulce, New Mexico. There are numerous people who have reported this. And the reaction of Hollywood to this collapse of this secret agreement was the movie Alien. So you just watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind and then watch Alien with Sigourney Weaver. You'll get some idea of how the road to dealing with the cosmos has been rather bumpy. And what's interesting is Spielberg made Close Encounters of the Third Kind and also E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Lots of love fest between us and the aliens. And then they say he investigated the UFO cover-up himself. He's got a lot of money, and he started asking around and getting some real information. And then he made War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise, where the aliens, and very similar to the actual original book by H.G. Wells, are blood-sucking mass murderers. There. So that's the evolution of Spielberg's thinking. Now, we ourselves, by the way, are trying to get a movie made from Morningstar Pass, the collapse of the UFO cover-up. So hopefully you'll be sitting in a nice comfy chair, munching popcorn and drinking a Frosty or a beer, watching the UFO cover-up collapse on the movie screen.
Are you allowed to talk about that, or are you still in discussions? Are you allowed to talk about that, or are you still in discussions?
Well, I can't go into any details, but I'm just saying we have this project going, and it looks very promising. We've gotten a lot of interest. Hollywood is very interested in disclosure now. They think it'll sell movie tickets, Sean. Movie tickets, popcorn. That's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So anyway, and people like the novel. And in the end of the novel, the UFO cover-up is blown to pieces because of two women and some cowboys.
Well, how do you think this thing's going to play out if they're rushing all these experiments, or not experiments, but rushing to publish?
My own guess. This is just a guess. They already have this technology pretty well working. I was waved ahead. I was supported by DARPA, and then waved ahead on the experiments, publishing the experimental results, because the government has decided it's okay to disclose that the U.S. government has gravity modification technology. That's the basic. The U.S. government has anti-gravity. I happen to have a theory that, just based on first principles, and we have experiments now that demonstrate this in a very tiny way, but you can really figure out how to extrapolate this to a full-blown spacecraft. So I believe Uncle Sammy has anti-gravity and is using it. And they want everyone to know that. They want everybody to know that.
Do you think this is related to, us skirting the edge with potential nuclear war with Russia, given how the insanity going on right now over there, or they're just trying to send a signal to the Russians, like?
Oh, the Russians, I'm sure the original gyroscope experiment where this effect first appeared was done by a Russian named Kozyrev. He was quite noted physicist. The Hal Puthoff's theory of unifying E&M and gravity was based on a very short scientific article by Andrei Sakharov. So the Russians have a lot of really smart guys. There's something in the vodka over there. Now, I will simply say, I think that they should have, I think enough people have gotten killed over this Ukraine thing. It's time to just make that end. I think this is madness.
I agree with you.
I agree with madness. And if anyone miscalculates, we're going to have a nuclear war with the Russians whose nuclear weapons work just great. They may not be able to get a good army together like they used to, but they can fight and they'll use their nuclear weapons. Anyway, so this is extremely dangerous what we're doing. And I have heard that the Russians and the Ukrainians wanted to make an armistice and settle. And let's just say members of the NATO alliance vetoed this, which is really stupid. There.
No, just none of the people in charge in our country. Yeah, none of the people in charge in our country, very few of the people in charge of our country have served. So, they don't have a clue what they're doing.
Anyway, I just, if we're dealing with a threat from outer space, the last people, we need the Russians as allies. And in fact, that's how, when the Cold War ended, we had a de facto alliance with the Russians against the aliens. I mean, remember Reagan's statement, I've often wondered what we would do if we were threatened from outer space. He made that statement 5 times. The first 2 times he said it, I thought, well, this is just Ronnie talking. I grew up in Oregon, right now north of California, and we were aware of his colorful way of speaking from being governor of California for 2 terms. But then finally by the 3rd time he said it, I thought, I was working in Washington, D.C. by then, and we all looked at each other around the coffee machine and said, he's trying to tell us something. He's either getting us prepared for something, or he's raising the ante in some poker game. And does anybody remember how the Cold War, after 40 years, suddenly just stopped? Suddenly it stopped with really no explanation. I'm sure the Russians were having a rough time.
Everything was falling apart.
Well,
I mean, we basically did to them what they're doing to us right now. We did to them what they're doing to us right now, which is basically bankrupting them by forcing them to spend exorbitant sums of money to maintain their military parity. And we're doing that now. They're doing that to us, and nobody sees it. It's really it's stupid. Well, people running things right now are stupid.
Who's running the place?
That's a good question.
Who's running this country right now? It's
not
Biden.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Biden's sitting on the beach. I haven't even seen Biden.
The last time I saw Biden, he was walking into an airplane with a MAGA hat in his hand. But I'm serious. I'm not kidding.
Well,
that was like 2 days ago.
I'm just asking that as a question. Who is running the country now? It's not Harris, and it's not Biden. Anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. And so it's a anyway. So we did these experiments, and anyone can do them. Anyone who has just some working knowledge of electrical stuff. All I need is a electric guitar amplifier. You can pick up one at a pawn shop with a mic input, and you want to have one that generates an amp that goes out as speaker output, and just a tone generator. You can get one of those for $15 on Amazon, and get some fine wire, like 30 gauge, and a little toy motor from Hobby Lobby, and get one that runs like 12 or 9 volts, and run it at about 12 volts and 400 hertz or above. 12 volts or above and 400 hertz or above, and you'll see this effect. And it's that. So anyway, the big secret is out. Uncle Sammy has anti-gravity, and he wants everybody to know it now.
So when are the
I
NHI going to
think.
show up?
They've already. I believe they've already shown up, and familiarity has bred contempt. Rather than being close encounters of the third kind, this has been more like the movie Alien, apparently. However, that's just one group out there. There's supposedly this group from the Pleiades that are basically just humans. They're like the Vulcans in Star Trek. They're nice and they like us. Well, I joked, somebody asked me why are they helping us? And I said, well, they may be short of infantry. They're fighting the lizard men, and they are short of infantry, and looking for some recruits here on Earth. We have a lot of people and who like to fight. That's one thing humans are good at. So basically, this is the craziest story I heard in this whole thing. I heard a lot of crazy stories. Complete screw ups, not only by human beings, but by the aliens themselves. There's this incident near Fort Dix in like 1979. And, Fort Dix is a big military base, and it's in the middle of this big oak forest. I mean, surrounded by forest. And there were a bunch of UFO sightings, and then somebody called up the base and said, there's this UFO hovering over the woods about 3 miles from, the base. We just thought you'd like to know. So they took it seriously, and people were seeing UFOs. So they sent a bunch of MPs and Jeeps out into the woods down this road to, try and find what this was all about. And sure enough, they saw this UFO kind of disc-shaped thing hovering over the forest. And they came to a place, and it was a clearing in the woods, one of these places that used to be a lake or a pond, and it kind of fills in with soil, and then it becomes like a meadow. So there's this little meadow in the woods, and here's this UFO hovering over this place, and there are 4 aliens on the ground. The little short gray guys, with the big heads. By the way, their heads just look big. Their heads are the same size as ours. They look like they're really brainy because their bodies are so small and scrawny. But anyway, so there's 4 aliens on the ground with this spacecraft hovering over them. So the MPs and the Jeeps gun their engines and start driving out into this meadow. The UFO takes off and leaves the ground team on the ground. They left them on the beach. And the aliens ran like scared rabbits into the woods. And the MPs spent a long time looking for them, but they couldn't find them. They disappeared into the woods, and they were running real fast, so the MPs just went back to Fort Dix and reported this incident to the higher ups, and it was just considered one of these strange incidents. They had no evidence, but no bodies or anything. But anyway, so then 3 days later, at one of the security gates at Fort Dix, this very tired, hungry-looking alien comes wandering out of the woods with his hands raised. He wants to surrender. He's probably starving. And the guard at the guard gate panics, pulls out a gun, and shoots him dead. there. Complete clusterfuck. Not only by the humans, but by the aliens, because they obviously the base higher ups had not told the security guards to expect anything like this to happen. So the rest of the aliens are probably dead out in the woods. They probably, just laid down and died. And so that's from '79. The other story I heard, and this is recently, is that the U.S. government is playing host some people from the Pleiades who look and act just like human beings, and genetically they are. I heard this when I was in Washington, D.C. There are people walking around on this planet who look and act just like regular human beings, and if you do a genetic test on them, they fall within the distribution of normal human genes, and they're not from here. And this was considered a security risk because they thought these people from outer space, they're getting government jobs. But anyway, so I heard that back in the '90s, by the way. But 3 weeks ago, it was about 4 weeks ago now, I heard this story that we have some of these ETs who are human, basically, out at Site 51. Some kind of technology. They're showing us how to build better saucers or something like this. Okay. Apparently, among this group was 2 females, women. And if you're out at Site 51, you're out in the middle of the desert, surrounded by razor wire, but you can see the lights of Las Vegas over the mountains every night. It's this dome of light. So these 2 ET women started pestering their hosts that they wanted to go to Vegas. So to make them happy, they got them some Earth women clothes, probably, or a range of them. They probably put on some really nice looking clothes, and with military escorts in plain clothes, they took them to Vegas and let them spend a day there, in the casinos, and took in some shows, and played the slots. Maybe they're psychics, so they worked the poker tables. They were told not to win too much. So anyway, then they took them back to Site 51, and they were happy. And that's just crazy enough to be true. Simply because if these people are physiologically basically human, and they will have basically human psychology, and they'll especially the women will rebel against the idea of being stuck out of this damn base out in the middle of the desert, for weeks on end. So anyway, that's the crazy story I heard, and it's just crazy enough to be true. Well,
I thought you'd appreciate that.
They say some of these women from the Pleiades are extremely attractive. Well, they're basically just human beings. They're human females, and and they think like we do. We are their cousins, apparently. In fact, you're all aware of the Greek legends of the Greek gods coming down and chasing human women that they liked. Okay, and they had then children, who turned out to be great heroes. A lot of the great heroes of Greek mythology were the children of the gods and Greek princesses. Okay, so I'm just an Episcopalian. I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm just an Episcopalian. But I know the Bible. In the Bible, in Genesis, it says the sons of God saw, this is after the flood of Noah and everything, or no, it's before the flood of Noah, apparently, which was a near extinction event. No one's ever explained it, but it's every legend, every major culture on Earth has a flood story. So something happened. It was a near extinction event for the human race. Okay, so before that happened, there was, it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were very cute and decided to have children with them. And these children were great men about whom many legends are written. That's the literal translation from the Greek. It doesn't say they were giants. It just says, physically giants. They may have been slightly taller than average, but they weren't, if they were born of human females, you can't be really big. You have to be able to be born. So anyway, that's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. So it's very easy to imagine that we are part Pleiadian. We are part extraterrestrial genetically because of contact in prehistoric times. The Earth Girls Are Easy was not just the title of an interesting movie, but it was it's from the Bible basically. And so, and this is what makes me believe that we're going to be fine. By the way, one of the other things I talked about in the book, and this was not my thing, it was Philip Corso, the book The Day After Roswell, where he witnessed, an armed convoy, escorted convoy, pulling into Fort Riley in, I think it's Fort Riley in Kansas, and seeing what they were carrying. They were carrying embalmed alien bodies and a bunch of wreckage. They were carrying it to Wright-Patterson because the Air Force and the Army were still part of the same organization then. And so that's what got him very interested in UFOs and helped prepare him for what he saw later. And Philip Corso was a very highly regarded military expert in Washington, D.C. for a long time. His record speaks for itself. And he was a distinguished World War II veteran in intelligence. He's Italiano, They had him part of the Roman, the U.S. forces occupying Rome, and he said they took special pleasure in cutting up Nazi agents that the Germans tried to smuggle back into Rome after the U.S. took it, and leaving them in the alleys for the other Germans to find. This guy's Italian, and then he goes and meets with the Pope. He says, "You can't make this stuff up." Anyway, so anyway, he saw this stuff at Fort Riley. Oh yeah, by the way, the troll who trashed my book says there were never any ground convoys carrying wreckage for Roswell. How does he know? And if Philip Corso,
they just teleported them.
Well, if you capture stuff, people from outer space and a bunch of wreckage, the last thing you're going to do is try and fly them. Fly it to right. No, you want to send 100%. It on a ground escorted highway, on main highways with armed escort. You might fly it from Roswell to Fort Worth. That's what they did. But you're not going to go flying it all the way to Wright-Patterson. You're going to take it by ground transport because you don't want the aliens recapturing it. So anyway, this guy's just a troll, and he should watch. His name is Semi. He called himself Semi from Tampa. He should watch Earth versus the Flying Saucers himself and take careful notes. There, beginning at 45 minutes into the movie, and he'll see they use electromagnetism. Anyway, so I complained to Amazon. I said, this is a troll trashing my book. I don't think he's ever even read it. He just skimmed it, and they said they were investigating. So just like they have the
Yeah, good luck
FBI.
with that.
They have the FBI working on it.
Yeah,
So
they'll take good care of it. They had the
yeah,
FBI. They had the FBI working on the last Trump shooter, and his body. You know, well, it got cremated.
isn't that interesting? Isn't that
Oh,
interesting?
that's not even. Let's not go there. But it's not interesting
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's too on the nose. It's like right down. It's exactly what you would expect.
exactly what you would expect. And
Nothing to see here. Move along.
move along
Move
here,
along.
folks. Nothing here
These
to
are not
see.
the droids you're looking for.
These are not the droids you're looking for. Um, but anyway, uh, according to Corso, the reason both the United States and the Soviet Union has such massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The joke was at Livermore, we have enough nuclear weapons to make the rubble of all this, every major metropolitan area on Earth jump 10 times. You know, in other words, the first one just makes it rubble, and then you just make the rubble jump, or the continued. And he said, yes, they had vast what's called nuclear overkill because uh, there's two secret treaties involved here. One is a secret treaty that we had with the aliens. That didn't turn out very well. That turned out very badly. In fact, we can't figure out even who was in charge then. They've all the documents relating to that seem to have been shredded and then fed into incinerators. So, but the other secret treaty that occupied the whole UFO related to UFOs during the Cold War was a secret treaty we apparently had with the Soviet Union that if the aliens invaded and we're going to take the Earth, we had an agreement. We're all going to just set off our nuclear bombs on the ground and turn the Earth into a radioactive wasteland that wouldn't be any good for anybody. It's like wiring your house with dynamite if you think the bank's going to try and foreclose on it, you know. So in my novel Morningstar Past, they talk about this. They call it War Plan Masada because it's Masada, you know, the Jewish garrison at this one
Last
place
stand
held
against the
out.
Romans. I mean,
Yeah,
the
and
Romans.
they
The
all killed
Romans did take it. The Romans took it.
The Romans did take it, but they all killed themselves before being captured by the Romans. And so or in Star Trek they actually had the Corbomite maneuver, and you know, that was the same thing. We're going to blow ourselves up. And so basically, according to Corso, we maintain such absurdly high stockpiles of nuclear weapons as a deterrent to the aliens. We had more than enough to deter each other. It was just to deter the aliens from taking this place. And we have it's in the movie Dune, in the book Dune, and in the movie, especially the best one, which was the early one in the 80s. The guy, you know, Paul Atreides says, "He who can destroy a thing can control a thing. We have the power to destroy the earth. That means no one can take it from us. No one." And also humans have a very well-deserved reputation of being willing to fight to the death, especially against some of these people out there, the little short gray aliens. They're the scum of the galaxy. And so we are at this point, I think, have gotten through the worst of this period of encountering the cosmos. We've been kind of in a face-off, a Mexican standoff with the aliens from outer space since about 1947. They first arrived apparently in about I think it was 41. There was a place called Cape Girardeau in Missouri where a UFO crashed, and that was when the government really figured out that we had invaders, possible invaders from outer space. And that was it was before Pearl Harbor. And that scenario was already explored in War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And believe it or not, before there was an internet, people would actually read books widely. And everybody read War of the Worlds. In fact, the images of destruction and use of poison gas and heat ray was then all seen in World War I and World War II. In War of the Worlds, London is leveled just like Dresden in World War II in Europe. Only it was science fiction. The Martians leveled London. And no one had ever depicted that kind of level of destruction or massacre of civilian populations before. And that didn't actually happen in reality until World War II. So it was all foretold basically in War of the Worlds. So the government was very conscious of that. And so we have basically been, since 1947, in a kind of armed standoff with various alien groups, one of which is quite hostile, apparently, to the human race and responsible for the abductions and cattle mutilations and things like that, and human mutilations. But because of our nuclear weapons stockpile and our advancing technology, I mean, when they first arrived, we had no space travel, we had no directed energy weapons of our own, things like that. We have now all of those things. We have become much more powerful than we were even in 1947. And now we have contact with apparently quite friendly groups of ETs who are basically our cousins genetically. So I think we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. The example, by the way, of a society adjusting to contact with a more advanced culture and then doing fine was Japan. When the American fleet arrived in the Japanese harbor in like 1845, they painted the ships black to impress the Japanese. And they sat off in Tokyo Bay and just did test firings of all their cannons to show the Japanese what kind of firepower we had with our fleet. And these were steamships. So they came and Japan opened up relations then with the West, with Europe. But the first people was nice, and we were nice to the Japanese. And the Japanese then, in about 30 years, by the time 1880 was around, were becoming a very modern nation. They had sent some of their very best and brightest people to Oxford and Harvard to learn the ways of the West. They had imported a lot of experts to show them how to make steam engines and trains and also military, especially military technology. And so Japan went from being a kind of medieval country to by all standards, a modern state for that time in about 30 years. And we can do the same thing. The Japanese showed it is possible. And so I believe our future will look like Star Trek. We're going to be actually asked to join the Federation at some point. There's a federation of good people out there, and we're going to be asked to join them.
So, John,
yeah,
we're kind of close to time. Any final words?
Yeah. Final words are: Uncle Sammy has anti-gravity. No doubt the Russians have it too. They're really smart, and they had a lot of crash flying saucers too, and shoot downs. And we're not alone in the universe, but the universe is by and large friendly to us. there's some bad apples out there. Okay, we can deal with those. Our future will look like Star Trek. We're going to be fine. And it's partly
right.
there. That's it. We're going to
Thank
be
you,
fine.
Dr. Brandenburg. As always, a pleasure.
Thank you,
And,
Sean, for having me on your show. Always a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
All right. Talk soon, my friend. Thank you, everyone.
Very good.